Welcome to the Red Gauge Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Kyle. This is Josh. Today we're joined by Dr. Hayden Pritchard, two-time IPF World's Competitor, Stronger Dads Collective show, podcast, and the Barbell and Beyond podcast. So really excited to have you here. Thanks for being here. I'm going to obviously edit it out, but that was like my fifth attempt at an intro and it was still messed up. So I think we're just going to roll with it.
It works,
Kyle's having a stroke this morning.
I'm not that kind of doctor. Sorry, mate.
Yeah. What was your doctorate in?
So I did my doctorate all about tapering for maximal strength. So when I first started my PhD, I was heavily involved in powerlifting. As you mentioned, I was competing. So I think the year I started my PhD was the last year I went to the IPF Worlds. And then after that, I sort of tapered off look at that. Sorry, I didn't mean to do a dad joke there. Tapered off the competing at, the international level and kind of just scaled back to doing some more stuff locally and got into a bit of CrossFit and other stuff. But so my whole model was really based around that powerlifting scene because that's where I was. And obviously powerlifting is probably, one of the purest tests of maximal strength as well, because they're, squat, bench, deadlift. It's the, I guess, slow lifts you would call, as opposed to the Olympic weightlifting, which has a big power element. And so my whole powerlifting background kind of set that model for what the PhD would be looking at and how it would be going about that in terms of training models and what we tested and things. So yeah, the whole tapering was basically how can we taper well to, to peak for competitions, and yeah, how should we go about doing that? Because at the time there was very limited research around, and my supervisor, Professor Michael McGuigan, kind of had this idea of, it would be worth looking into. And so we were one of the first ones to kind of jump into that strength space. And as we mentioned, being from a little place in New Zealand, that's where probably some of the biggest challenges of my PhD came from, was, trying to get participant numbers and these sorts of things when, you're from a town of like 70,000 people. So trying to find people that are somewhat resistance trained, that are willing to give up their training for a period of time wasn't the most easy part of my PhD, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So I was just actually thinking about that when you were talking about it, because we are in a similar town. There's about 7,000 people, in the town proper. We serve about 60,000 or something. So there's quite a few in the area. But I was thinking about, well, how many like very strong, well-trained people do I know who live in the area? And it'd be pretty hard to put together a study, even if they all said yes,
Yeah. And that's the thing. Cause we're like a university town. So we have, a university, and then I was working at what was called the Polytech at the time. So I don't know what that is for you guys. We call them like, technical training institutes or something like that might be the term that would be familiar for American. But yeah, for us, it was like, there weren't that many people anyway. So how am I kind of going to recruit these guys? And so thankfully being the lecturer meant that you kind of had, a few people at least in your class that would be willing to jump in because they wanted to help you out and were just interested in understanding and being involved in research. So I think I had aimed to get about 12 to 15 in each of the studies. I think the first one, we ended up only having like 8 complete. And then the second study, we might have had 12 that made it through to the end. Might have been 11. I think we might have lost one. And for me, that was the part that really just got me super frustrated, because I knew that I had low statistical power, like in each of those studies, but there was nothing I could really do about it because of where I was living, where we were conducting the studies. Just, it was kind of like, this is the nature of what it is, and I just have to put up with it and kind of just be realistic that there are limitations, and this is why. But that first study was super frustrating, man. Like I had multiple people pull out and they'd almost completed the entire thing, and you kind of can't coerce someone to finish your study, right? It's like an ethical thing, especially when they're a student, because you're in a position of power over them. So like, you can't be like, man, you've got like 3 more sessions to go, just pull through. You've kind of got to respect their decision, which was, challenging at the best of times and definitely a bit frustrating, but yeah, it is what it is. And we got some data done and I got the thing finished. So that's the main thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's not doesn't have a stats background or a research background who's listening to this, as the number of participants that you have grows, it gets easier and easier and easier to show that there's evidence that something, there is a relationship that you're looking for. And so it is a big deal, and it flattens out after a little bit, but going from 10 people to 30 people makes your demonstration of effect and stuff so much easier than hanging out with 8 or 10 or 12 participants.
Not much I could do about that, but it was there and it happened, and I think we still managed to find relatively well-trained people. I think I was aiming for deadlift of like 1.8 times body weight. So it's not that
Right.
substantial, but they're at least lifting, right?
Yeah, yeah. For the most part, unless you got some mutants in who were like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." Was there? What did you learn in your program? Like, what was your big takeaway from it? Like that's in terms of applications, maybe not in terms of being a researcher.
So basically, the main sort of thing that I guess learned, if we're going to do like an elevator pitch really of it, is that if someone's tapering to improve their strength performance or they want to perform on a certain day, they basically, in theory, should be reducing volume substantially. So think of, total tonnage of training, or number of sets, whatever way you kind of want to look at that metric. But the total amount of volume is generally the main thing we should be reducing when it comes to training intensity. So how heavy we're lifting, you generally want to keep that relatively high, maybe reduce it a little bit. And then there's a whole bunch of nuance within that, right? Because as you can imagine, coming into a tapering period, every person will have been training differently leading up to that point. So, sure, in the terms of the study, that's kind of what we saw, or in terms of the literature, that's what we see as the general themes. But if you have someone coming in who has been training at, say, lower volumes for whatever reason, they may not need to actually taper as heavily, or potentially not even at all. Whereas if you have someone who's been, hammering themselves and has almost been overtraining in that period leading up to the taper, they're probably going to need a more extreme version of that. And so, like, it's great to have these general principles, but I think as a coach, it always comes down to the individual in front of you and what are you seeing? Like, and when you think about, I guess, the intent of the taper, which is to reduce the fatigue so that you can actually express your performance on meet day, that's the main thing you need to come back to, right? Is how fatigued is this person? How substantial do I need to make my taper or the reductions that I'm doing here? Or do I even need to do that? Or, are they every Saturday or whatever coming in and they're hitting heavier lifts progressively? Why would you change what you're doing if it's working and they are expressing their peak performance, when they're in the gym? So yeah, there's a whole bunch of nuance, but that's kind of the general takeaway. Focus on volume reductions, maintain or increase, maintain, increase, or slightly decrease the intensity. But generally, it's about specificity, right? If you want to be strong on the day, you kind of want to keep strength around. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about before the show even started, me and Kyle were just talking about this, almost the same thing you had said there, was making sure your coach is more than just like some ideals. Like maybe they really like the taper, but make sure that your coach is like understanding where you are at, right?
Yeah.
We just talked about that. We were discussing kind of the move towards less is more. We're doom scrolling Instagram together here. And the move towards less is more. And I just kind of broached subject is like, when is the pendulum going to swing? Eventually, if we keep going less is more, we're going to find out where that cuts off, right? Because that's everybody's always extreme, right? We're going to go now. Eventually, less is not going to be more.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be undertrained at some point, and people are going to find that, and all of a sudden it's going to come back up. But where, like, if your coach is just a principal, if they just blindly keep giving you stuff, like make sure that you're asking questions or maybe get a different coach. Like they should be actually paying attention to what affects the principles are having on you as an athlete. Like,
yeah. And I think like when I look at an individual or someone who's in front of you, like studies are looking at averages. And I think oftentimes we don't forget that, but I guess we don't acknowledge that as much as potentially we should, that when we look at a study result, it's what on average did we see? It's not what happened for every single individual. And so when we come to training an athlete who is in front of us, we have to remember they are not the average, and the averages might give us a really good place in terms of where we should start, like what sort of things might be good principles to apply at the start, give it a go, see if it works for that person. And if they're progressing, like generally if something is working and they're progressing, that's good, keep doing that, right? But it could always work better. And so there are going to be cases where it's still worth tweaking things a little bit to see if, hey, maybe a little bit more intensity here. Maybe we try a different exercise pattern or something different in there to try and see, does this get a better effect for that person? But you kind of start with these big rocks and these principles of what should work and use those initially, but then you need to be led by the athlete and kind of see, well, are they giving me feedback that they're feeling really beat up and I'm giving them a good amount of volume? Well, actually, maybe that is too much volume for them, or potentially the opposite, right? They feel fresh, they're coming in, they're asking for more, and you're like, no, the research says, 5 sets per week on that's all you're going to need. It's kind of like, well, okay, cool, but this person might have something different to the average going on in their life, and potentially they are one of those people who, recover really well or make substantial gains faster than what you expect. And you kind of need to be able to be led by that, but keep in the back of your mind, where's a good place to start? And then how can I kind of adjust from there to get the best outcomes for this person? But then likewise, you mentioned the Stronger Dads Collective. There's probably other seasons of life where even for that individual, things will look quite different. And you're going to have to take a completely different approach if you're still working with that person when they are, under higher stress from work, they've got kids, whatever it might be. It's not always going to be the same, even the individual changes. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, it's a really big deal. It's one of the reasons I've really appreciated the kind of movement towards open data with studies, where people are trying to show all the individual data.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you look at it, you'll have two interventions, and one of them will have a smaller bandwidth but a higher average, and the other will have a much bigger spread of results but a lower average. And it's like, okay, but there was 2 or 3 people where like this was the jam for them, like it was the thing to do. And even though, again, the individual gets lost in the average, right? That was a really interesting lesson. Our coach had like every article and book and piece of research saved for like 50 years when we started training. We were fortunate to have the same strength coach who started lifting in like the late 40s. And I remember the very first study that I pulled out of his drawer was like comparing sets of 8 to sets of 12 for hypertrophy. And the study came to a conclusion and everything, but it was really interesting because it had all the data published. And whichever the winning group was led entirely by like one guy. There was one outlier in the group who, if you took him out, the whole rest, the averages were almost the same. There was almost no difference between the two. But there was one dude who put on like 20 pounds of muscle in the 12-week intervention. And it was like, okay, well, you got that guy in there. It really messes up the whole rest of the flow for everybody else. Not great statistics, like they should have looked at those numbers a little closer. But, it is really interesting to look at the individual data when you get the opportunity to.
Well, especially back then, there wasn't a whole lot out there. So that probably like led people's careers. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's like off that one piece of data.
It's kind of why like every physio gives you 3 sets of 10, right? Because it goes back to some of those original studies around strength and hypertrophy. You're like, guys, you could give a different range rather than 3 sets of 10, but here we are.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the Stronger Dads Collective. I'm real excited about it. You were recommended to us by a previous guest, and so we're really excited to have you on. And so I am looking forward to actually going and listening to those now, because I've got kids, and I think that podcast was kind of written for me about 8-9 years ago or whatever, when my youngest was born. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your show?
Yeah, so basically kind of similar situation to yourself there. Like I had my first, and I just thought to myself, it would be really nice to be able to help, encourage more dads, but show other dads that it kind of can be done, that you can carry on training or at least doing something during that period and keep your fitness and keep your health. And then the other part that came into that, I guess, for me was the longevity piece, because I had always been consistently focused just on, pure strength, whether that be powerlifting, weightlifting. That was kind of always my focus. I would often let the cardio piece kind of slide. And so that was the other bit that kind of came to the front for me, was the fact that we probably need to be thinking a little bit more broadly than just our strength or just our power or whatever it might be, that actually considering some of these other bits that are, proven to help with longevity. If you want to be there for your kid when, they're older and you want to be around, then you probably need to think, okay, cool, it's great to be strong, but I probably need to think a little bit about some of the other things I might be adding into my lifestyle to keep me active in that. And so I got back into cardio probably about 9 months or something after my son was born, because that was one of the things that I kept coming back to in my head. I'm like, awesome, you are looking after the strength side, and you never had a problem with that. You love that stuff, but you need to think about conditioning again. And it was actually one day sitting on the couch in our house, and my wife's like, I'm going to go for a run. And I was like, what? You're going to go for a run? And so she went out for a run, and then I'm sitting there in the house thinking, man, she's just had a baby, 6-9 months ago, whatever it was. And here you are, like, sure, you're lifting, but you haven't gone on a run in about 4 years since you did the marathon almost, like you need to sort yourself out. And so when she got back, I'm like, I'm going on one too. You can look after baby now. And then we just switched. And so since then, I've been generally good at keeping cardio. And the last year, I've been focusing a bit more on strength again. But that was kind of the other piece of that, is like, sure, we can focus on these big athletic goals for ourselves, but we do need to think about the bigger picture of if we really want to be around for a long period of time, we also do need to think about how can we take care of our longevity, whether that be increasing conditioning like what I did, potentially it's thinking about the diet, those sorts of things. But the majority of my guests are strength athletes on that podcast, pretty much because that's my background. And I have a lot of relationships with powerlifters from, around the world from those experiences that I've had with international competitions. So there's a few cool people I can call on and have a yarn to. And so for me, that was the other cool part of that is, like you mentioned, I don't know if that was on or off air about, putting together this list of 15 people that you kind of wanted to talk to. I thought to myself, this is actually a really great way that I can keep in touch with some of these other guys who are dads and kind of keep that relationship, but also just get to have a chat about fatherhood with some other people. And so, yes, the podcast is for sharing and hoping other people can learn from, but I always have to come back to that piece that actually this was originally intended to be a way to chat to other dads doing cool stuff and learn from what they're doing and how they approach that, take some things that might work for me and, kind of get those lessons for myself, but then be able to share those on with other fathers and parents who, might be interested in the same sort of stuff as me. So I thought, hey, why not kill two birds, one stone? People are going to want to come and talk on a podcast about themselves. They're probably not going to do that as much if you just ring them and have a chat and ask them about fatherhood, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
First off, I think 4 years of not running after a marathon is completely, that's the right amount of time right there.
I think that's a pretty normal response to running.
And I'm done running.
I did it.
I've done it.
I ran.
Well, I kind of had to throw that in there, right? Like, because I have done a marathon back in the day. So it's not like I was a guy that had never done cardio, if that makes sense. I'd always kind of toyed with it because my background was athletics. And so running was one of those things that I did. I wasn't a long distance runner. I was a sprinter, but still the running thing is something that I've come back to when I'm doing conditioning because it's the type of conditioning I probably enjoy the most, I guess. So, yeah.
I love that it was your wife that motivated you to do your first run. I always feel like my wife is a superhero, like everything she's doing. I'm like, I should be a better person.
It was basically that. Like, man, if she can do that after having a baby, like, cool, man, you're training in your garage because it was COVID times. You're training in your garage, lifting some weights, but you're not doing anything else for your health. And you've got this kid now who, you say you want to be here for. Well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Especially being in strength training, like a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people, if you've been in powerlifting or whatever, bodybuilding, maybe even a little bit, but like we all kind of go down the same path of like, you get a little stagnant. So you're like, if I was a little bigger, I could be a little stronger. So, like, when I got out of the Army, I was probably like 180 pounds and I was doing fine. But like when I got back into powerlifting after coming home, like I pretty quickly got to about 220 because I felt better bench pressing basically. Like, so it's like, all right, I'm healthier, but I got weighed less healthy by getting into it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, oh dude, I feel just great. But it's like, I probably just should have kept jogging. Probably would have been a lot better for my health. Yeah, that's funny to think that you're almost going backwards. Like, and it's just a lot of people, like a lot of people that we're men. A lot of times we would bulk up, get bigger.
Well, and I always think it's funny, like if you look at it from a health perspective, it's really important to do some strength training and it's really important to do some cardio, right? Like I have like a 5-finger test. It's balance, strength, cardio, mobility, and something else. I forget what the other one is. Power. You got to do some power. You got to do a little bit of power work to keep your
Hofield 5 fingers, 4 things and something else.
But a lot of those you can get, like, you can kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. Like, you can do, like, strength training is great mobility work if you're doing it right. And, it has the opportunity to be a little bit of balance and ambulatory reaction and stuff, right? So you can kind of kill a lot of those birds with one stone. You don't have to, like, plan 5 different phases of your workout every day. But, like, just like you said, rolling in a little cardio to stay healthy, it doesn't take that much. Like, if you really love strength training and you don't love cardio, if you just did 10 or 15 minutes, 5 times a week, you're going to see really significant, protective effects for your health for the rest of your life. So it's not like it's a huge commitment to doing it.
And I guess
it'd be interesting.
Go ahead. People always talk about, concurrent training and you're going to lose all your gains and blah, blah, blah. But like that sort of stuff, it all really comes back to your, how much training you actually have time to do. That's, if you devote some of that to cardio rather than to strength, obviously that's going to impact the strength gains you can make. And then B, your recovery ability, right? If you just try to tack on more stuff on top of your strength training, there is going to be an impact on your recovery and that will affect you for a little bit. But it's like anything. If you manage the training load intelligently, you think about where you should put your harder sessions for each in the week, you can design a pretty good, well-rounded program. I mean, every team sport athlete basically has been doing that forever, right? Where they do conditioning and lifting. It's not like it's anything new. This whole like fear of concurrent training is so weird because you have these rugby players or whatever that are squatting, great amounts of weight, and yet, the guy that's entering a second powerlifting competition has given up running because he says it's going to interfere with his strength gains. It's like, mate, have you watched rugby? Have you seen how much stronger than you those guys are? Like, they're doing running every single day. It can be done. You just need to not be an idiot with how you program. So, like,
that information might be really well used for like the 6 or 8 guys on the planet that actually need to worry about it. And you know what I mean? But just like we talk about Instagram, right? It all gets filtered down to the masses. So we just absorb that information. Like, oh, cardio is bad. It's also not saying that going for a small run or walking every day is bad, right? They might have been talking about like running 3 miles before the workout. Like they're not even defining cardio.
Yeah.
That's a big ass
yeah
section of exercise.
That's something I have talked with people a lot about when they're worried about how much cardio they can do. I'm like, you got to understand that it exists on a continuum, right? Like it's just 10 or 15 minutes to be a healthier person. It's
it doesn't even have to be that hard.
yeah, right. And it's 45 minutes or 2 hours or whatever if you're like getting to where you're peaking for your marathon. Like if you're doing real endurance training, like real serious endurance training, and that's your main jam, you aren't going to get as strong. But like that's not really what 99% of the people who are asking the question are asking about. Yeah. And it goes the other way too, right? For people who are doing really serious endurance training, they're not going to get so big lifting weights that they're going to slow down. Like lifting weights is still going to be helpful.
Hasn't happened to me yet.
Yeah. I don't even do the cardio and do the weightlifting. I still aren't to the size. Like,
I wish that would be the problem that I had. Man, I'm just getting too big. I just can't. Like my arms are just so big now. From my, damn it! How do I stop this from happening?
Yeah, you got to run you just run arms down because your arms are so damn big. You
too heavy.
Pick them up.
You got such muscular forearms. I can't hold them up the whole time. Yeah, it's a hard life. When I started, I'm curious about like interesting things that have come up with, being a young dad or a new dad, maybe not a young dad, but a new dad. I started lifting again. I had taken like 4 or 5 or 6 years off or something. And then my wife was 8 months pregnant with our 3rd kid. And I did some stupid yard work, and I was really excited. I had back issues for a long time because of a herniated disc from when I was a kid. And I was really expecting to wake up the next morning suffering. And I woke up the next morning and just felt like $1 million. And I was like, time to start training again, baby. And so I told my wife, I was like, I literally woke up in the morning, got out of bed, and I was like, I'm going to the gym tonight. She's like, I'm 8 months pregnant and you're going to leave me home alone? I was like, yep. And so anyway, started training again. My youngest son was born. He had a sleep disorder. So for the first like year and a half of his life, he never slept for more than about 40 minutes at a time.
Oh, geez.
And then he'd wake up and cry for like 20 minutes or half an hour, and then he'd go back to sleep for 40 minutes, and he just would repeat that. That was 12 hours a night every night. And so as you can imagine, both me and my wife were extremely sleep deprived for a very long period of time. I mean, it was like, it was normal to only get like 3 hours of sleep in a night or something, and usually broken up with going to take care of the kid. So well worth it. My kid's amazing. I would do it 1 million times over. He's the best thing ever. And so I'm very happy, like it was, I don't have any issues about it, but it was very hard. And I remember for the first time in my training career, I had a hard time holding on to stuff. Like the lat pull down, I'd lose the grip on the lat pull down or the row machine and deadlift. And I was always like, had kind of a freakish grip. Like it was a fun game to play to see like what stupid things you could get me to do. And so for the first time in my life, I couldn't hold on to anything. And it was really, really like horrific for me. Like on a personal level, I was having a hard time eating that. And then as soon as we got his sleep disorder figured out and he started sleeping through the night and I started sleeping through the night, it was never a problem again. Since then, like I literally I slept a good night's sleep, and then the next day I could like double overhand 600 pounds or something. It was like, oh look, it's back. It just fixed itself like that.
Popeye.
Yeah. Have you like being having young kids and doing your things, or like talking to your guests? Have there been interesting things like that where like hey, your grip strength might just disappear while you're exhausted?
Not that I can recall. Nothing to that extreme, mate. Like that's quite a.
Yeah, it was a pretty extreme situation.
This is kind of an extreme person.
Yeah. And it was a pretty upsetting, period of time, like in terms of physically, like it was just difficult to be alive.
Yeah, if I got a full night's sleep and all of a sudden could double overhand deadlift 600.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I would be like, holy shit, something.
Yeah, I think we should
happened.
just leave the story there, mate.
Like-
Like that's going to be a little bit hard to beat. Um, like to be fair, and coming to like one of the sort of key lessons, I guess, from that has kind of been thinking about life as like seasons in terms of what you can and can't do during each of those times. That's probably been the biggest thing that I've identified is everyone who's been consistent through that time, it's looked different depending on what stage of parenthood they were at. Like you talking about that sleep deprived piece and me thinking back to, you know, myself and then other guests who have had that really initial phase of being a dad where there's, you know, that first period of time, I can't claim that it was as bad as yours, but for me, like it did things to me, man. I became like not a very happy man for a lot of that, just because when I don't have sleep, I don't function very well. Like I can handle, you know, 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever, it's fine. But during that first few months with Harvey, our first, it was not great. Like, you know, it was always unbroken, multiple wake ups every night, probably getting between 3 and 6, depending on the night. But it just sort of accumulates. And I reckon that's the part of, you know, being a parent that is just so hard. Is like if you had one night of 3 hours sleep, and when someone who's not a parent thinks of it, that's what they think, right? They're like, oh, 3 hours sleep, you can handle that the next day. But then you get back to your 7 or 8 hours of sleep and you get to start to feel human again, right? Like you go into this deep, dark, sleep deprived hole for such a long period of time that like you're not operating as you normally would. And so you have to make some changes to what you do. And I think we did a relatively good job early on of kind of separating and taking turns, and that, you know, you might take the first part of the night and then the other one takes the second half of the night, so that you both at least get a little bit of sleep. So some of those things were really helpful. But on that training front, going back to the seasons, I started to distract myself there. Sorry. What you do during those phases of life where things are really stressful or there's really minimal sleep or whatever, it can look very different to what you might do normally and optimally. And this is where I get really frustrated with like the optimal way of training or chasing after what is the best thing. Because of what we already talked about with individualization, it looks different for everyone. So there isn't one optimal, right? Optimal is what works for you in your current situation. And so with the fatherhood piece early on, your training will look very different and probably should look very different. And if you're doing something like anything, it's going to help you maintain your progress to such an extent versus taking 6 months off and then coming back. So even if you're training once or twice a week during that period and you're hitting some of the big rocks, some of the big movements, whatever those might be for you, the amount of strength that you can hold on to doing very, very little is like unbelievable. You can kind of do, you know, one session a week and you will hold on to that strength for a very, very long period of time. It could even be one hard set of one movement a week, you know, up to about 2 months. You're probably going to be pretty good with that. You're not going to lose a whole lot. Sure, you're not going to be a competitive international level powerlifter if you're only doing that much, but for an everyday person, you're going to maintain a lot of your strength and it's going to be fine, right? And then once that stuff settles down and you get the sleep schedule back under control, or, you know, you're feeling a little bit more human again, then you can start to slowly, progressively increase things again. And that's the other mistake people make. Once things are normal, they try jump into what they've done previously. And that's when people get hurt and say, oh, strength training's not for me anymore. But it's like, well, yeah, you tried to jump in after having 6 months of sleep deprivation and not training. You tried to jump into the program you were doing when you were a 22-year-old at university. Like, it's not going to work like that. You have to build up progressively. You have to start with baseline, 1 or 2 sets of these things, and then build back up, like based on what you can handle, and make those changes for you over time. Like, it's cool that that person on Instagram is doing, you know, 10 sets of 10. You're probably not doing that for a while. So take your time to rebuild. Probably don't ever do that, but, you know, take your time to build up to what is considered optimal and kind of go based on what you can handle and what you can feel, because you're going to be slightly different to what you were prior to the kid anyway, because you're older now. You've probably also aged substantially in that time of not having a whole lot of sleep. So you probably are a different individual. So just being intelligent with the approach, I think, is a real big key and something I've learned. And, you know, some of the people that I've spoken to have gone on to, you know, compete at Worlds or win at those sort of competitions again as fathers, and they've gone through these periods where they didn't train much. So it doesn't mean that it's the end. It doesn't mean that you can't be competitive at whatever you're doing in the strength sport. It just means that you probably need to approach it differently for now. And remember, there's a long game here, right? Like, as you said, you wouldn't change that for anything, right? Because you've got your kid and they are the most important thing. And I think keeping that in mind is, what is the most important thing? Is the most important thing bench pressing 315? Probably not, right? So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about how important strength is to you. It's like, actually, it's cool and it's awesome to be strong, but there are other cool things in life. And being able to separate your identity from your bench press number is probably an important skill.
I'm working on it. I'll get there one day.
No, I mean that is fantastic advice though, because just understanding, and especially your first kid, I feel like it's obviously worse for your first kid because you don't know what you're getting into, but like the level of systemic fatigue you're going to get that you're not used to from, like I used to be a health teacher. I'm in the weight room now, but like just explaining to kids that stress is stress. Good stress and bad stress is still stress. Getting a new girlfriend or graduation. It's almost the end of our school year. So graduation, all these things are stressors, right? And that all builds up. You're not used to taking on that fatigue. So you can do the same thing. If you just try to do all of that while having a first baby, like something's got to give. And yes, like we are saying, like, let some of that weight training go. Like it's either that or you're going to be giving up some of the ability to manage your household, which is obviously not what you should be doing. Because you don't like my story. I think I don't know if I said it already. I apologize if I do. I think it was before, just so everybody knows, we had like a full podcast conversation before this started. So that's why we keep forgetting what the hell we've talked about. But, I joke about my first kid. I literally packed my gym bag, put it in the trunk of my car, drove to the hospital with my wife, thinking that I was going to just have a baby and then go to the gym. I was 23. I didn't know anything. And that gym bag stayed packed for like a year and a half in the trunk. And then when I got it out, it's not even like I got it out to go to the gym. I got it out because I was like, I'm never using this again. What the hell? Like, I should sell this belt or whatever. I need money. So it was just like, it was life-changing. I had to do all sorts of things that were way different. So I kind of wish that somebody would have told me like, hey,
just go 2 days a week.
Just go 2 days a week. Yeah. Just go, you know what I mean? Do one heavy set a week and you probably could maintain. But that's not where my brain was. We also came from a powerlifting background. So we thought, this is how long you should be in a weight room.
I'm going to lift weights every day for 8 hours.
Yeah. So there just was no time for that, which was stupid. There was time. I could have been doing even at home stuff. I could have went for a jog or a walk or bench or push-ups and sit-ups and air squats and pull-ups and things and maintain my fitness. But the nice thing now is my son is he's graduating 8th grade, so he's going to go into high school. And he is the reason now that I'm getting back into fitness. So he made like the high school's like summer basketball team. So he's got to go up all the time to the high school for summer basketball. So then like I haven't played. I always tell like my knees hurt, I'm out of shape. And so just like last week I was like, oh, all right, I'm already here. Maybe I should just get into fitness. So it's kind of it's a cool full circle. Like that little turd is the reason why I stopped exercising. And now it's 13 years later and it's the reason that I'm getting back into it. So not that I
polished now.
Yeah. Not that I haven't, the polished turd. Not that I haven't exercised over the last 13 years. That sounds like I didn't do it. I obviously went back and started exercising again, but it's just cool. Like, so you never know.
Yeah. I think the other like real grain of wisdom in that advice is that, you like we're like 99% habit. So if you're in the habit of at least doing something, like whatever it is, whatever little bit, it's much easier to build on that. If you're in the habit of not doing anything, it's really hard to build on that.
I was way more intelligent after my second child than my first. Like my first, I think I just tried to train as normal afterwards and realized that wasn't going to work. And so I can't actually remember what that 6 months looked like in terms of what I did. But I know I was lifting during that time, but I think I was still trying to do Olympic weightlifting. And early on in that time, I was like, you ain't warming up enough to be able to do snatches and all this stuff. Like, you do not have the time to spend in the gym. So you're going to start powerlifting again. And so then I ended up back doing powerlifting with some running on the side after that, episode with my wife, setting the example there. But with my second, I came up with this idea of like micro sessions. And so essentially I would pair like 2 movements that you could do either from the same rack or from the same piece of equipment. And you could just superset them back to back. And you had the minimum of working up to like a heavy set of say 3 or 5 or whatever it might have been that you wanted to do on the day at like an 8 or 9 RPE. And you had the option to do drop back sets, or you had the option just to call it after the top set. And so that worked really well because I could literally walk into the like home gym that I had and do 15, 20 minutes and be finished. So I had no excuse. Like I set it up as that way in my head that actually you're just going to do something. Here's like 3 sessions. I want you to do at least 1 a week. and go in and do it. And yeah, literally a 15 or 20-minute session. And I would just walk out and I'm like, well, I did my thing for the day, like it was fine. And then trying to do other things where I'm stacking other chores, like the dog needs a walk. Well, okay, I'm going to do the walk, or I'm going to take the dog for a jog so I can get my cardio, like trying to find ways that are a bit more time efficient, because you kind of know a little bit more about what that period of time is going to be like. So coming in with different expectations. And I always remember back to coaching a guy years and years ago, and he told me, oh yeah, I'm about to have my first kid this weekend, like don't change the program, it's fine. And I just remember, I think I'd had Harvey maybe a year before that, and I'm just like, okay, like, and tried to give some good grains of wisdom of like, don't be too hard on yourself. If you don't get it in, we'll make them priority sessions that, if you only get one session in, here's priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Don't worry, get the first one in and then just leave it at that. But yeah, I can't remember exactly what happened there, but I do think we had to adjust the program. But it is one of those things, you kind of come in not really understanding what that will be like. And you also don't understand what you're going to get. Some people get kids that sleep 8 hours from day dot, and that's awesome for them. Wasn't my experience. And and
the kids just like got a positive attitude, and grandparents live next door, and like there's a lot of levels of support there that might be missing.
Our second child slept so much we thought there was something wrong. Like it was the opposite. Like you like wake up and feed and just went back to bed. It's like, I would like to get to know you, dude. Like, what is going on here? He slept so much, and it was like, I guess we'll just
let him sleep,
hang out, like, because like the first one, it was like we were all in shell shock, and it's like, all right, baby's down, everybody go to bed. Like, no, I don't care what you're supposed to do. It's nap time, everybody.
Yeah.
Try to sleep while you're sleeping.
2:30 in the afternoon.
And then this one, it's like you wake up from your long ass nap, and Hayden was still asleep, and he's like, all right, shit. You guys want to watch a movie or something? Like, what's going on here? He was wonderful.
Yeah,
so again, averages, just like anything else. Yeah, this is an average amount of advice. Mm-hmm. You might have a baby that's perfect, and if you have time,
also keep training. Don't change anything.
Because there's going to be somebody that now just hears this and they just trash their training, and then they have a baby that's awesome and like huge support system.
And they've gone back to 2 sessions a week. 20-minute sessions. I'm like, mate, you've still got 3 hours, mate. The kid is napping for 3 hours, 5 times a day. Like, sort it out.
Go work out. Go work out. Yeah, it is funny having kids. My first 2. So my wife has been in childcare forever. She started working in childcare when she was like 14. She has like 3 degrees in it, like developmental psychology, family studies, early childhood education. She owned her own daycare and now a nature preschool. And so, we had our first kid, and it was actually pretty smooth. It was pretty easy. Like I think it would probably be a pretty typical experience for, the amount of sleeplessness and all that kind of stuff. He was a pretty normal baby. Second kid, same kind of thing. And I remember feeling like everybody had blown having kids way out of proportion. I was like, this is way easier than now. Of course, I have a literal like subject matter expert with 20 years of experience, at my right hand side. So like I have a inflated sense of, efficacy. But I do remember having my third, and like he wasn't very old, and my wife was like, I'm gonna go out with my sister, and I was like, okay, sweet, have fun. And so she hands me the baby, and at the moment that she walks out, one of my kids body slams the other kid off the kitchen table, and then my youngest starts crying, and I've got food burning on the oven, and I'm like, oh no, we've passed the point where it was easy, and now it's really hard.
I don't know how to handle this.
Yeah. It just went from smooth sailing to just like drowning overnight. It was a really interesting experience.
You're flipping through your like Rolodex of how to handle problems, and it's all weight room.
Yeah. They're all weight room solutions.
No, that doesn't work.
How do I get a better double overhand deadlift? Not applicable in this situation.
But no, I really do think that I hope that podcast is able to keep going. That's an awesome tool for people that want the information. But it's just like we were talking about before. Like, how do you get that information out to the right people? Mm-hmm. Like the stupid internet and its algorithms. Damn kids and their internet.
I just need to be on TikTok doing some dances with the thing in the background. I don't know.
Yeah,
that might just get views because it's funny because I'm not dancing very well. But I don't know. Somehow I don't think that strategy works for me. I'm not.
I'd like to see the Venn diagram of people who you'd be getting. So like the Hayden dances circle, and then the dads who want to lift weights circle.
Click some data on those two. See if there's any overlap.
Yeah, who is that watches both of those?
I wouldn't be watching me dancing, that's for sure.
Wouldn't it be great if that was like 100% overlap? Like that was just the crew that
Nailed
you were
it.
speaking to?
Yeah.
Just didn't realize.
As far as internet success goes, I guess it depends. That's the thing, right? Is your goal get closer? Is your goal internet success, or is it doing the thing that you wanted to start doing? Right? Like Mike Israel talks about it, and he's like, he had years of putting like really good information and how to lift, and here's programming and all of these things on the internet, and he's like, I didn't really have any success, and then he's like, then I started making self-deprecating jokes and calling myself gay and being ridiculous on the internet, and then he just blew up. And he's like, well, I guess this is what I do now. Just review people, and now he's got millions of followers, and it's like, he's like, if you want to be successful, just try a bunch of shit. So maybe you should dance. Like, that's the moral of the story.
My wife would wonder what was going on, mate. I struggled to dance at weddings unless I've had a beer or two. So it's like, she'd be like, what's going on here? I was like, why are you dancing now? This is bizarre.
I dance a lot now as a 40-year-old who just doesn't care that I look ridiculous because I can't dance either. Same thing, you know. Now I just do it I like the fact that other people are embarrassed for me. I've learned to enjoy that. And so it's fun for me now.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'm a wonderful dancer.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
It's all shoulders. Yes.
I'm just going back to, you mentioned about the kind of trying to go viral or whatever it is type scenario. In my newsletter week before last, I kind of wrote about this whole thing of like, should you be chasing virality or your integrity and staying to the things that kind of are meaningful to you? And this is one of those things that I keep coming back to in terms of like a principle about why I do the things I do, right? Is like you mentioned, giving out good information, sharing these stories, being real to who I am. Like I always feel like I need to really stick with that, because that is what is true to me and why I chose to do the podcast or choose to do whatever I do. Like if I suddenly started doing ridiculous stuff, like we talked about the virality of that dropping the weight on my leg, what happened there. Like if that became what I did, I'm like, I don't think I would actually enjoy that, because I wouldn't be being true to who I am. So I might end up, getting a lot of videos because I'm getting a lot of views on my videos because I'm hurting myself and people think that's funny. But like, I don't think, even with the more attention that might bring, I don't think that would bring the fulfillment and the satisfaction in the process of what I'm doing, right? Like, yes, it could fulfill one of those things that you want to achieve, which is getting your name out there, getting virality, whatever. And there might be some benefit to that. Like, I haven't seen that. But the part that wouldn't feel right is, well, then you're not actually doing the thing that you kind of think you're wanting to be doing, or you're not sharing information in the way that is true to you. You're not being a, evidence-based practitioner or whatever it might be that is important to you. And so I've kind of gone around in circles a little bit about that and thought, just trying to think about that from okay, if you can't go viral doing it the way that you want to do it, would you want to go viral anyway? Like, is that, for you guys, for instance, if what you did, you started sharing stuff about the pod or whatever, I don't know, and somehow went viral, but it wasn't doing it in a way that kind of represented the reason that you started to do the show. Like, I'm sure that would feel less fulfilling than getting, say, a couple of hundred views or whatever it might be of people who are really engaged in it, message you and say, this stuff's really meaningful. I find value from it. It's helping me be a better athlete, coach, whatever. A couple of messages like that from the people that are watching is probably more meaningful than 100,000 likes on a video of you with your cat, doing something ridiculous. I don't know. At least that's how I feel about it,
Yeah, this whole venture for us was just we're both school teachers, and so this whole venture for us was really inspired by kids just doing dumb stuff year after year. And it was like, we really wish that the space, like the discourse around training, was just a little bit more elevated, like that people understood, what ideas are going to be detrimental to them in the long run and what ideas are going to be good for them. Because there really is just a lot of like, well, my dad did this, or my uncle did this, or I read this in a magazine or whatever, right? And it like, it really derails like effective progress, And so, if we weren't contributing to that, I don't think it would be any fun.
Yeah, just so like there's wrestlers. I just had this conversation. I was talking about weight loss to a kid in this last week of school, and he brought up Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira loses 30 pounds before a UFC fight.
Yeah.
It's like, surrounded by doctors.
Yeah.
B, like, I really think that he is probably the most talented
Weight cutter.
which is a weird thing to say, but
Yeah.
his body is more talented at doing that than anybody that's ever walked the earth. Like, he really, for whatever reason, whatever makes you explosive and me bald, right? Like, there's things that people are talented at, and I'm very good at being bald. So
You could be a little more bald.
yeah, I guess I could. I'm pretty good. But like, you can't just look at the people at the top of everything and think that that's good practices. Like,
Yeah, 100%.
it's probably like, if most, maybe not most, that would kill some people.
Yeah.
If we just put out what he did and you just tried it, like,
30-pound water
it's
cut.
very extreme. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't mean as a 14-year-old boy in growing, we should start doing that to our bodies. It's a fucking terrible idea. If sports didn't exist, everybody would agree that would be an insanely bad idea to do. But there's sports, so we're like, well, he could go to state.
Yeah, I love all of the background information that's missing there. Like, you don't have the medical support, you don't have the nutritionist. It's not a 24-hour weigh-in. You know, like, the number of like check marks that you have to do to get to be in that position is really missing when you're just doing recreational high school wrestling.
Yeah, probably wasn't his first weight cut.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? This man's probably been
doing it a long time,
fine-tuning this for 2 decades.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't even recommend that anyone else does it. You know, like,
no.
the
But
protocol might be out there. He
like,
would probably say, don't do this. Like, this is,
Yeah.
for all the reasons you've just stated, like, this isn't the best idea, you know, for you to do. But yeah, people look at it and be like, that's what the elite guys do. That's what I should do. And it's like, man, that's not how training works. If you train how the elite guys train, or you cut how the elite guys cut, it's not actually going to be the best thing for you, because you're not the elite guy yet.
Yeah. I mean, could you imagine if we did the same thing, like, in our scope? Like, could you imagine if everybody just copied Andrei Milanichev's squat workout? They're like, I'm just going to put 1,000 pounds on the bar, do 3 singles. That's going to be my whole day. We're like, okay, yeah, sure. Go for it, guys. Yeah, it's going to be wonderful. I look forward to reading your obituary.
Man, squashed in weight room. I can't even imagine unracking 1,000 pounds.
Yeah. It doesn't feel good. I've never squatted that much, but I've walked it around, and it feels pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Walked it around?
Yeah, like either like on a yoke, or just walked it out of the rack and put it back, you know, like 1,000 pounds.
Not just wandering around the gym with it on your back, talking to people like, yeah, how you going?
Just trying to get a drink from the drinking fountain. Has there been, how did you get into sport? When did you start? How did you get going on this crazy roller coaster?
So during, being from New Zealand, not we all, but, you know, it's the New Zealanders all play rugby, right? It's our national sport. So we all play rugby. We don't, but we all do. And so I was always interested and keen on rugby. My brother he's older than me, so he kind of got into sports first, I guess. And so I'd always be doing basically what he was doing, probably to start with, you know, like, we'd be playing rugby in the backyard. We played one-on-one tournaments, you know, against each other, just out on the farm, because we grew up on dairy farms from the time I was probably 5 to about 12. So Dad was managing a bunch of dairy farms, so we always had space outside. And so I kind of just always enjoyed that and liked the competitive side of it. Like, competitiveness is always something I have enjoyed, whether that be sport based or, you know, whatever. It could be playing Monopoly, man. It doesn't matter. So I played rugby through to high school, knew fairly early on that I was a little bit fast, like I had a little bit of speed. So, you know, I'd be playing a game of bull rush or whatever it might have been at school, and I'd be the guy that could catch the other strong kid. No one else could, you know? So I would always had this idea that I was a little bit fast. And so when I got to, I guess, 15, 16 at high school, I was doing okay at the events, and I went from being fast at a school of 40 kids. So just bear this in mind when I say fast. There were 40 children from 5 to 10 at that school, right? So I was one of the 2 fastest, but it was out of 40. So, you know, it's not even probably remarkable. But for me at the time, I'm like, man, the sprinting's fun. I'm quite good at this. So I got to high school,
you could
and
either be like top 15%, or you could be Usain Bolt, anywhere in there.
Yeah, exactly. You have no idea, because of those 40, 20 of them are like 5 to 7, right? So, so I'm the top 10% of like 10 people. I don't know what that's even remarkable, you know? And so with I got into high school, realized I actually wasn't as fast as I thought I was. And so, the first few years of high school, or I don't know what do you guys call high school? Is that like 13
Yeah,
through to 18-ish?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We also call it college, so that's kind of confusing. But so high school, we'll call it. I, I don't even think I made it to a final at school in the running. I'd do the heats and I'd always want to make it through to the final. And then I think it would have been about fifth or sixth form, which is probably 15, 16 years old, that I made it through to the final in one of those events. And I was like, yes, like I'm finally getting faster. And like this whole thing was also spurred in the background by I'm trying to train, I'm trying to read about sprinting, all these sorts of things, wanting to understand how I can be better, whilst continuing to play rugby and enjoying that. But then I got to about sixth form, I started competing and managed to get to like our national championships for I think it was the 400 only at that stage. And then the next year it was the 400 and the 200. That at least went to like our North Highlands or our national champs, which is probably, I don't know. I don't even know if that'd be state champs over where you guys are. There's only 5 million of us that live here.
That's
so
about the same. Yeah.
And probably
About
when
the
I was
same.
growing up, it was probably closer to 4 million of us. So maybe it's state champs level, we'll say.
Mhm.
And so kind of just fell in love with this process of training. And when I got to about sixth form, I started to train under a coach who had been worked at the school for years. Like he was there, for a long, long time. People's dads of us that were there at school got trained by this guy when they were sprinting, So he was like the sprint coach for the school and always had been kind of for as long as people could remember. And so I'd kind of been enjoying the training process, but had kind of been self-directed, probably doing stupid stuff, not really that good. And then I started training under a coach who, would take us to the gym in the off season. We'd do, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, strength, power phases, and things like that as we went through the season, and kind of got this base level of an understanding of what training is, how to strength train, doing the big lifts, squats, deadlifts, bench, military, all of those sorts of things as part of that program. And so for me, it was during that phase that I really fell in love with training and really this whole idea of, especially because although I had some speed, I wasn't the fastest. And so for me, I saw training as the way that actually you can get better and you can improve. And if other people who are also fast but don't train, you might be able to get closer to them or potentially beat them, right? And that was kind of how I viewed the training process. And obviously we had all the track sessions and things alongside that. And so I ended up giving up rugby in seventh form. I think I was like third 15 in sixth form, and would have got to play in the second. So I wouldn't have been top level rugby anyway. So for me, it wasn't that hard of a decision. Looking back, I might have got to play a game for the first 15 because some of the others that played in my position got hurt that year. So, looking back, maybe I should have kept doing rugby as well, but I didn't. So I focused on this, managed to make the final that year at the Nationals in the 400. And I was pretty happy with that because I knew that I wasn't the best. As we said, I thought I was great when I was at a school of 40 people. I got to a school of 1,600 boys and realized pretty quickly that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, but that I could get better. And so I guess I fell in love with that training piece and understanding that you can actually improve at this thing if you put in the work, that your body will adapt if you give it the right type of stress, and that you can be better at this thing. And when you're competitive, you always want to be a bit better. And then when I got out of high school, it was really, I kept doing athletics for a few years, but the athletics scene outside of high school, at least at that stage in New Zealand, there weren't a whole lot of competitors. And so you would go to national championships if you wanted to, but you'd be competing against, high school kids potentially, in the opens who would beat you. And I mean, that's not that much fun. Or I think, for example, one time I turned up and I think there were 3 of us in the event. So I was automatically in the final and automatically a medalist. And for me, that just wasn't a lot of fun. I'm like, well, and I actually came third in that race too. So,
You go home with your bronze medal and you like sit down on the floor and you just cry a
Yeah.
little. And
Like,
you're like, what am I?
this represents last place. Like, come on, man.
Okay.
And so I basically started playing rugby a little bit recreationally again for a couple of years during that phase. And then one of my lecturers at the time, I was still doing strength training just because I enjoyed it and I fell in love with it a bit when I was doing athletics. And he goes, have you heard of this sport called powerlifting? And I was like, powerlifting? What's that? And he goes, it's squat, bench, and deadlift. He had actually never competed. Someone else that he knew had been a powerlifter and he was just into strength training. So he kind of, mentored me along to be like, yeah, we'll go have a look. And back then, this was like 2010, there was no competitions in like my immediate vicinity, like within an hour. I had to travel sort of 2 to 3 hours to be able to get to an event. But I jumped on the forums at the time, got to know a few people in the scene, found some events that I could go to, did my first meet and did relatively well and thought, man, this is cool because I can be competitive again. There's actually other people in my weight class, that I can compete against. This is pretty fun and I can do it myself. Like I don't need a whole bunch of equipment. I don't need 15 other guys, to play rugby or anything like that. I can be responsible for my own results a bit like I could when I was doing athletics. And so it just became this organic way that I could continue to train, do what I really like doing, watch my body adapt, get progress. It's very numbers based, which is obviously awesome when you are competitive because it's pretty simple to know if you bench more. Like, did you add another couple of kilos to the bar? So that became really addictive to me, trying to get stronger, add another kilo. And then I had the ability to actually go to competitions. The only challenge was back then there wasn't raw yet. So in 2010, it was, it was equipped. There wasn't really another division. And if you competed raw, you competed raw against equipped people. So I think I did like 1 national championships that was equipped, and I pulled on a bench shirt and a squat suit. And then as soon as they had the option for just a full classic meet, I was like, nah, I'm done with that stuff. Like that's way too much admin. I remember sitting in a commercial gym, and I don't know if you guys view squat suits, but putting like the squat suit onto the bar that's loaded up and like hanging off the bar, trying to get myself into this suit, and people just looking at me like, what is wrong with this kid? Like, why is he wearing that to train in? Like, what is going on? He's wearing this strange looking suit. And then when you're benching, walking around like this, and I always trained in commercial gyms back then. There wasn't a powerlifting gym, so it was bizarre. People just thought I was weird. But because I was one of the trainers at the gym, I guess I got away with it.
And equipped powerlifting, you really benefit from having a little team and a little experience around you and stuff. Like
asking some random to unrack your bench with a bench shirt, it's quite terrifying because they don't actually understand that they could throw you in any direction at any time, and they won't be ready in next minute. Yeah, you're a statistic.
Ask him to help you get out of the bench shirt.
Yeah,
come into the changing room with me, man. I need you to help me. Get some baby powder.
Yeah, it really is its own experience. We thankfully the kids that we coach, the high school league that we have, they went to all raw several years ago, and I was very grateful for that because I really didn't want to put kids in bench shirts or squat suits or anything. It's not fun. Yeah.
Even they went knee wraps only.
Yeah.
So it was raw plus wraps for a little while, but even that, it was like, just like anything, like, sure, yes, wraps were originally created for safety, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you're allowed to put anything on your body, just like sleeves are right now, right? Sleeves are in hot water right now because, like we've had now 2 people on that have talked about their sleeves being, Logan Chapman said he could put a 55-kilo plate on his knee sleeve.
55-pound plate.
Yeah, 55-pound, and it wouldn't compress his sleeve. And it's like, well, all right, I agree that probably is not a knee sleeve. That's just a wraps in freaking
in disguise.
In disguise, like, but yeah, if you've never done equipped, like, it's fun. Like, it's fun to throw.
If you've been lifted for a few years and you're burnt out and you want to try something different, take a stab at it. I mean, it's not gonna. It'll be an experience.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, I got to have that experience of lifting equipped, which a lot of people today haven't, and so people don't really understand what it was like. And my experience is very, very minimal. I can't claim to be, an equipped expert. I only did it a couple of times, but just having those experiences in training, and having to try and figure it out, especially try to figure it out myself because there was no one else local. I had to kind of, talk to people on the internet about how do I put this thing on? What do I need to do? How does it work? What line should I be aiming for? How do I get it to my chest on the bench? Like all of these things that you sort of, going into the gym, trialing it, coming back, asking someone on the forums or direct message about, and then going and trying it again the next week. It's like, it was quite a fun experience. But yeah, definitely, as soon as I had the option to go classic, it just felt more, I guess, like what I did for sprinting. It was, you just using yourself, I guess, with the belt and the knee sleeves I wouldn't have had at the time probably, but we would have had access to the belt. My coach just never got us to use it. And so it was kind of what you would see people lifting with in the weight room, right? Which to me was more like what I was trying to do with my lifting was I'm trying to lift it this way. Like equipped is cool and it's very technical and it's very, there's its own challenges, right? And so people that disrespect it, I think, probably have never tried it. But also I would much rather go raw. I would much rather compete raw and compete against others in that class. So yeah.
I think it's just it's just its own other sport.
Yeah.
It goes through the same movements, but it's a different sport.
Yeah. It's like trying to compare pole vault and high jump kind of. You
Right.
know, it's like
very, very similar,
It's
but
probably
it's just
exactly
different
like that, right?
goals.
Because the stick
yeah,
helps you get higher, right? The squat helps,
Right.
the
yeah,
suit helps you lift more. So yeah,
yeah. And I mean, in both the sports, you're going to run and plant, but then what you do afterwards is going to be real different. You know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, in your so you've been doing it for a long time. In your time training, has there been things that like you know, you thought were the bee's knees, the best thing, and everybody should be doing it, and then like as you've gone along, you've been like, you know, maybe that doesn't actually need to be a part of what we're doing.
Um, like probably nothing like in particular. I think it's more just like the training theories and philosophies that you see
Hmm.
come and go over the time. Like there were periods where really high intensity training really regularly was kind of the thing. I jumped through a bunch of those really high volume trainings back in the day, like where you would have super high frequency of training. So things like Smolov, where you'd be squatting like 4 days a week. I've
Yeah.
been there, done that. I've done max squat every day. All of those different aspects of, I guess, training culture, you might call them, that kind of come through. They're a trend for a while. People follow them, and then it kind of, cycles out a little bit. But I do think there are pieces that you can take from each of those as you do it. And I think for me, like seeing so many different approaches and ways of doing this training thing, it probably more points out that there's a lot of stuff that works. And there's a lot of different things that you can do to get stronger. And so, like, just because someone doesn't train in the way that works for you or for your athletes, that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. Like, West Side conjugate type stuff that can and does work, right? Building up to a single at an RPE 8 and then doing some drop back sets, that works. High frequency training clearly works. High intensity training can work, but
Mhm.
the rest of the whole training equation has to change based on your approach, right? You can't do high intensity and high volume at the same time. That's obviously not going to work. That's breaking a few fundamental rules. And then even the
Right.
same thing probably with some of that Shako stuff, right? Where you would do like a squat, you might do some bench, then you go back to doing a squat and you're doing a whole lot of volume, but it's not very heavy.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like that would probably be the biggest thing to me, just seeing those trends come, be in vogue, and then go out. And it's kind of like, okay, why is this thing a trend? Why is it working right now? And try and learn from that piece rather than just being like, it's a trend. It doesn't, this will be here today, gone tomorrow. But what can you kind of take from that and how can you apply that? And also, I think it's like adding something to your toolbox, right? Like each of those things give you a different training approach you can potentially use for that athlete who isn't getting results doing it whatever way you think is best, right? So
Right.
I guess it opens you up to continuing to be creative in your approach because you realize that there's 1,000 different ways to do this thing. And just the thing that's popular now, it won't always be popular, but it might work for some people some of the time really, really well. So there's a reason it caught on, right? And that's, I guess, the thing. These things come into vogue because it worked for someone. And this could almost go back to that elite athlete doing something thing, right? Someone did it and it worked really well. And then it got popular and people threw it out there for everyone. But it's kind of like, using the Russian system or the Chinese system where you kind of throw enough people through it. A couple of them are going to work extremely well and they will really take advantage of that training because it works for them. Others will get spit out and they're gone. But for those who it works for, it works really well. And I think that's a little bit like with these training approaches. There's certain people who get a lot of value from a certain way of training. So when someone tells you this is the best way, take it with a grain of salt, but don't disregard it because there are going to be other people who do actually benefit from that thing. So put it in the back of your mind as an arsenal that if someone's not getting results from what you're doing, is there something different you could try here?
Yeah, I love that. Whatever those kind of like program ebbs and flows are, it's always like the Scooby Doo moment of like removing the mask, and it's just load management, fatigue management. Like you just like, how many
It's
different
just
ways can we slice this
it's
cake?
Scooby-Doo, but it's the same guy every time.
Yeah, yeah. Just like you think of load management, like should have thought that would have been a specificity and variety. Like it's just the same.
It's just a different way of
The same.
repackaging the same thing, right? And I think
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
like the other part that I think we often forget is like what is actually going to be fun to do? What's going to
Uh-huh.
keep people
Yeah.
coming back? Because if someone's still lifting 5 years after they start, chances are they're going to be a lot stronger when they started, right? And what they're
Yeah.
doing will look completely different, but it may not look completely different because it's necessarily the thing that works. It might look completely different because they were bored of the old thing, and to keep them
Hmm.
training and keep them in the gym, they had to change something up, and so now they're doing it this way.
Yeah.
And that's why I think taking advice, like Instagram advice scenario again, like that person's just talking about what's working right now for them. It doesn't mean it's always going to work, and it doesn't mean it's going to work in all situations. And probably the exact same thing with research, right? Because you take a bunch of people who are trained a certain way through a certain process and you get a certain result. But if you change who the people are, you change how trained they are, you change the program they were on, you might see a completely different result, dependent on that. And that's why with science, as you mentioned at the start, right, trying to get larger sample sizes is going to give us better outputs because it's what tends to work for most people most of the time. But yeah, training.
Yeah.
And then, like we talk about quite a bit, is like, especially like joining in 2010. I feel like you joined like right. It was kind of like the peak of insanity. I feel like it's been like West Side and everything, but understanding like, did this training philosophy come out of a gym that everybody is on steroids?
Mm-hmm.
That makes a difference.
I once can I just jump in a story on that?
Yeah, 100%.
So I once had a guy, I won't name who it was, who I was talking to. They were coming and they told us a little bit about like their way of training and what they were doing, and I was asking some questions, and then he jumped into this thing where like all of my athletes have to do wide stance squats, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, why do all your athletes have to do wide stance squats? And
because he hates them.
He went to Westside. And he had talked to Louis and had a chat and all that sort of stuff. And so he came back, and every single athlete this guy had was going to be doing wide stance squats because it's what's best. And I said, so what about your rowers who have like their feet, relatively close together in those boats? They can't produce force from out here. No, wide stance squats. And I was like, seriously? Like, and so I just stopped asking any questions after that. And I was like, look, I can't take too much seriously here because he's been told one thing from one guy and then that becomes the rule for everyone. Like, and this wasn't even taking into account that those guys are wide stance because of the equipment they're using, trying to take advantage of the multiply, all of this sort of stuff. But no, you're like completely athlete only person squatting to row a boat. They're training for strength to row the boat. They're not training for strength to do a wide stance squat. No, they have to wide stance squat. And I was just like, oh man.
Yep. Which is the information it's almost completely opposite of most athletic strength coaches. Like if you talk to a strength coach that's in a sport, like they're going to try to push you in. Like that's so opposite of what, and it's like, yeah, but Louis Simmons does it.
And it's horses for courses, right? In that context, fantastic advice. Exactly what they probably should be doing, right? And multiply equipment. But when you try and translate something from one context and put it directly into another without having any critical thought yourself, like, okay, it might work. So maybe try it for a period of time, compare it against doing it the other way and see kind of what translates to the best force output for those athletes in their actual circumstance. But don't just say, no, this person said it, therefore that's the rule, I have to do it that way. Like, test, refine, trial, error, see what works. Or think critically about it and think why they may be doing it that way in that context. And is that going to be the best for you in your current context? Because your context is going to be very different to working with the strongest multiply lifters in the world. Like, yeah.
Well, yeah. And like with your advice, like if you say you trained a rowing team and for some reason you thought like wide stance squats are going to be the thing, take half your team and put them on wide stance squats and half your team doing whatever they normally do. Like run your own little study. It's not going to hurt to try it for 8 weeks or whatever. Yeah, it's not going to hurt to run it through. No. Maybe you'll find something amazing. But
you could do periods of time with both, right? There's no harm in doing some wide stance squats for a training block and then switching back to narrow and mixing it up for that difference and that engagement for the athletes as well. And just putting it out there, I know nothing about rowing. New Zealand's very good at rowing. I don't even know how wide their feet are in a rowboat, but that was what came to my mind at the time. So just put that out there for context.
I have not seen rowboats that are this wide.
Neither have I. Yes, they look very thin. But just in case there's some secret little compartment, I don't know.
It's like a TARDIS from Doctor Who. They're bigger on the inside.
Yeah,
it looks narrow from the outside, but
maybe I'm the one that's being fooled here, man. Maybe I was wrong. Okay.
Yeah,
it's happened before, man. It's happened before.
Rowing and wide. That's it. You guys were wrong.
So I have a question for you as somebody who's done real lab research with real lab athletes and run them through stuff and coached them and everything. I've been curious because we've had a bunch of guests on who are have their doctorate. They did original research with people. And one of the things that I guess I hadn't thought about a lot before that I've really noticed from their stories, sometimes especially their off-camera stories, like they might not be on the show for anybody who's going to look for them, but is the amount of like interpersonal interaction that the researcher has with the participants.
Mm.
And we brought up Louis Simmons and Shako, and like there's a bunch of people in the training space where like I think that the system really is them. Like they have an eye for training, they understand load management, they understand the sport, and if you try to duplicate what they're doing, you're probably not going to have a great time, because it's not so much the things that they wrote down and gave out. It's really more about the deep level that they understand their events in. Do you think that happens in research also, where sometimes the outcomes of the research might be heavily colored by the efficacy of the researcher? Like, do you think that there's researchers who could coach ineffective strategies to look better than they are?
Because are you saying like quality?
Yeah.
Like accidentally being too good of a coach.
Yeah,
that you're getting outcomes
because
that
they
aren't
can
necessarily-
motivate
right.
and they can do all the little tips and tricks on the side and stuff. Like, is that something that you see as being an issue in the space at all? Do you know?
I would say potentially, but typically you're comparing two interventions, right? So
Yeah.
you'd still be getting, if there was full supervision of each of those sessions, you'd still be having that in both instances. So whether
That's
you were
true.
doing wide stance squats or narrow stance squats in your intervention, you might still be coaching them well and encouraging them and giving them that, that guidance to do better, right? And then the other part to that, I think that plays into what you're saying there as well, is the buy-in piece. So the only part that I could probably foresee where there could be an issue with that, where there could be some result, was if that researcher was favoring a certain intervention. Like he was always
Right.
giving more feedback or more positivity to the
Yeah.
person who was doing the wide stance squats because that's the one that he wanted to be better. Then potentially there could be, but I do think because of that fact that in both instances you'd be having the researcher and or the like lab supervisor or postgraduate student, whoever it might be, in both instances. And typically we're going to be comparing two interventions. We're not just doing one thing and saying this is the best, because if you haven't compared it to anything, how do you know if it's the best? So I would say it's probably not going to be as big of an issue as it could be, but probably one of the ways that I would think of this more in the coaching sphere is like, it's like when someone gets a new coach, right? And they've just read up about that coach and they think this coach is the bee's knees, and they write a program and then they have these fantastic results in their first training block. And I would be assuming that it's not necessarily that coach's training is 10 times better than their last coach's training. It's more that they were more bought in. They did all the little things and actually, stacked those 1% gains throughout that training block because they were getting better sleep. They were focused on their nutrition. It was dialed in. They were turning up to training engaged, motivated, putting effort into each set to, focus on that force production every repetition. There was no sloppy reps. All of those bits that you might not even be aware that you're doing, but because you're suddenly more bought into the program, then yes, I would expect in those sort of situations to see a substantive result, right? And it's interesting what you said as well about how these people are the system, or they were the system. Like people that try to apply Westside might not get the same results as people applying Westside with Louis Simmons, because really the only Westside is the Westside where Louis Simmons was there, or the coaches from Westside were there, right?
It's show up, get up to 300 pounds, train with a group of super aggressive dudes. Like that's part of the game.
Yeah. That's the secret sauce, right? Is that's the part that probably worked with that program. But again, you probably had guys that were, chewed up and spat out from that system as well, who needed something different. And so there's probably a little bit there to be said for finding the coach or finding the system that actually aligns with you and with your way of working, right? If you're an aggressive lifter, you're probably going to go awesome there. If you're that more thoughtful, sit back, approachable person, probably having, other 315-pound gorillas yelling at you during your session might not work, right? Like I might love that on a deadlift day, but if you give me that on a bench, like might not work as well for me, like, yeah, I'm all for it in certain situations, but there are definitely going to be people who that environment really makes them thrive. But then also the buy-in piece, I think, is really key, because having a program on a spreadsheet is very different from having a program with someone actually helping you with it, giving you feedback. But even probably more importantly, you knowing that you're accountable to someone and you respect that person, and so you want to do the things to do well in that program. And I mean, you guys probably get that with your youth athletes to an extent, right? They probably like your coaching, hopefully, and that helps them engage in the process, and they actually listen to what you say, right? They don't they might trust you over what they see on Instagram, which is probably one of the battles you guys have to face at the moment. But if they trust your guidance over that, they're more likely to implement your thing, right? And they're probably going to do it to a greater degree than they would that person on Instagram, because there's not that relationship. And I guess that's what all of this comes down to, right? Is there is a large part of coaching that is a relationship, especially when you have that in-person coaching, because you're there giving feedback in real time. And, you know, I would say that leads to results, you know, quite substantially. I don't know how you would test that. You know, I don't know if it's possible to necessarily test that, but I do think there's something there to, as a coach, or, you know, creating buy-in with your athletes and getting that, you know, that Brett Bartholomew type stuff. I don't know if you've read any of his books, Conscious Coaching and things, but a large part of what he talks about comes back to that, you know, it's a lot about the relationship you have with the athlete, or the athlete has with you. That is really important in getting them to progress, getting them to buy in, getting them to do the things. And actually, if you can master that piece, your program being super great may not even be as important as you think, because you know, as we've talked about, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat with strength training, right? So if you give a pretty good stimulus, but they buy in a whole lot more than giving them the absolute best program on paper, but there's no buy-in, what's going to win?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, there is something to be said about really focusing on that as a coach, because we've all seen, like, you know, my sports also was track and field, and I've seen coaches who just could always produce a good team. Like, they could just always produce solid results. Like, I don't think that if you had a super talented athlete that you would want to hire them as the coach for the one-on-one to get them, you know, ready for whatever their next level is or whatever. But they were always good at getting kids to buy in and engage in the process and get a little bit better, so they're, you know, they can take those next steps or whatever on their own. And I think that that's probably, you know, a lot more valuable for the sport or for the community than, you know, being a super niche, like, I'm going to just dive in on this one athlete or whatever and push them all the way to grand heights, you know?
Yeah, I find that part of coaching real fascinating, and I guess I haven't had that much in-person coaching, especially lately, to be able to do that. And so I started coaching at a local gym in town recently, just basically because I want to be seeing people move in person. You know, I have a couple of clients that come and see me at the home gym here. Most of my clients are online. But then I started doing this coaching in basically a commercial gym that is focused on strength conditioning rather than just being a commercial gym. So their classes aren't, you know, they're not CrossFit, they're not F45 or anything like that. They're kind of their own strength and conditioning focused classes, you know, focus on progressive overload, 4-week training blocks, all these sorts of things, which kind of hold true to some decent principles. And that's been really good for me to come back and see people in person and be able to have that like immediate feedback and immediate discussions and create the relationship. And over the course of the weeks, like, because I hadn't had as much of that over the last few years, because I had been predominantly remote, because I had a full-time job and I didn't have the capability in that job to be able to, you know, just jump in and do this sort of stuff, because I wouldn't have seen my wife or my kids, which are more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talk about that quite a bit. I feel like we're almost the exact opposite. So I've been in person for the last decade, and we just started getting into some online coaching. A little bit of that being that I get to coach the kids until they're done with high school, but some of the kids I would love to see go on.
Yeah.
I've coached some pretty strong people, so it was like, man, maybe we'll get into this and we'll be able to follow some of these kids but I haven't, I'm sure I'll learn, but like the making a program and then communicating over text or a call once a week is like, there's no personality in that. And I'm quickly realizing like my power in coaching is creating a relationship so that they feel good to come to the weight room because we have a good relationship. And then they will just like you said, now they're going to follow the workout, where it's like when now it's just the workout and I've got to build that relationship. I've realized it's like, oh,
it's almost harder, right? Like it's almost a more challenging thing to do. Like it sounds really nice, like, oh, cool, coach all these people online. Like it's, you know, you make stacks of money because it doesn't take you as much time or whatever. But actually, it is a really hard thing, and there are people who are very skilled at it and have been doing it for a while and can do that very well. But yeah, when you're trying to transition from, well, not transition because you're doing both, but when you're trying to do a bit of both, it is really hard because you've got, on this one hand, you've got the ability to provide immediate feedback, build a really strong relationship. Like within an hour, you might talk to them multiple times. Whereas if you're sending messages, it's not at the same time, you're having to wait, that asynchronous type thing. It's completely different. And it takes a different skill set, I think, as well, to be able to do that really well. And I think it is challenging. And as soon as if you've been predominantly online and then you get to coach people in person again, you'll instantly, for me, I instantly notice the difference in that. And I've always enjoyed online coaching myself because, and that's probably the other piece of this puzzle, right? Is the athletes that you work with, there are certain people who will be really, really good with online coaching because they can make good decisions. They understand the intent of the program. And some of this will be on the coach to be able to, educate on these things. But they're also really motivated. And so they're going to go in and do it, right? If you have an athlete sign up to online programming and they're not that motivated, they're not that bought in, they don't understand how to make adjustments, it makes the training really hard because they think they're doing the right thing, or they're trying to do something and it's not quite right, or they see what you wrote down and they push too hard, or they go above the RPE, and trying to have that education back and forth on text is quite challenging. And there are ways that you can help to do that with your onboarding calls and discussing these things and giving resources. But I think it's pretty hard to beat in-person coaching. Like if you had the option of having an online coach or an in-person coach and remove all those constraints of timing and all that sort of stuff, I do think an in-person coach is going to be the best option. Like it's just the nature of it. And I especially think that for more complicated movements like the Olympic lifts where, the technique feedback that you can make or the progress you could make in a couple of sessions from doing it in person just outweighs what you can do online, to the nth degree. And it's not that it comes back to the exact same thing we said with training, right? It isn't that one is always better than the other. It's that there are certain circumstances and contexts where each can work really well and where you might have to use one over the other. Because you might not have an experienced coach where you are in Olympic weightlifting. Well, then you need to use someone online because that's going to be the best you can get, right? And that's these things where it's horses for courses. We can say these general things like in person is better and you'll make more progress. Well, you won't if that coach is useless. So, you'll be way better online with someone who actually knows what they're doing and can give you a few technique tips that you can think about during the week, or, give you some resources. It's going to be a tenfold better thing than someone who doesn't know how to snatch teaching you how to snatch, because then you're just going to be, 10 steps back. So yeah, again, adding that context and that grain of salt piece, right? Like it's,
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if everybody had a Mike Tuchscherer in their home gym.
How good, right? Just click your fingers and then Mike's in your gym. And he's got his velocity tool so you can actually get the feedback,
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't work. And I mean, that's, I guess, why we have online coaching, is because there are circumstances and environments where it actually works really well. And there are people that make, unbelievable progress with online coaching. So it's not to say that there's anything, wrong, or what's the word, like suspicious about it. It's not like it's not like some sort of a strange conspiracy that people are out to get you, with the online coaching and they just want your money and they're grifting and those sort of things. Like it actually works. You can make progress and you can do well with online coaching. And, I personally wouldn't choose to sell a product if I didn't believe in it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's probably also like one of those things like, like you said, it really is going to be, if you're brand new, if you can find somebody nearby who knows how to do the movements and knows just the basics of training and stuff, that might be a better option, because then you can get just a tremendous amount of information in your first few months of training or whatever. But if you've been doing it for 2 or 3 years already and you kind of have a pretty good idea of how to do a lot of stuff, then it really becomes more about, like, do I want to spend the time to learn how to do all this stuff on my own, or do I outsource it to somebody else who can help me with the programming and the frame of mind and the competition experience and all those other things that you need to know, right?
Yeah, and with that as well, because I've coached a few Olympic lifters, and whenever I've had someone who's brand new email me about doing Olympic weightlifting, like that's one of the questions I'll always ask is, how much experience have you got? Like, is this something that you know how to do? And I've had cases where people have said, I've self-taught myself, and I'm like, okay, like before we go any further here, if you want this to work, like I would like, even if they're living, say, half an hour away, whatever it might be, I'd say I want you to travel and do a few weeks of in-person sessions before we even consider the online stuff. And sometimes you'll get people that are happy with that and they'll do that and that's fine. But then you have other people who basically, say they'd rather not. And then I'm like, well, look, here's some other coaches you could potentially talk to. Like, and I don't, it's just because that's for me an important part of coaching Olympic weightlifters. I want to know that you're competent in the movement. So if you're a national level weightlifter, of course, like we can figure out some of that stuff as we go. But if you're brand new to it, trying to figure out how to perform a snatch, and you think that sending me some technique videos, videos of you doing the lift for feedback are going to work. Like it'll probably take longer than it could if we just came and did some in-person sessions. So why don't we just do that and kind of like shortcut that learning process, and then we can get to the online stuff with maybe in a regular check-in. But again, it's what works for the individual, right?
Especially for us, we joke. I find this that like a lot of my young ladies that we coach, like if I give a verbal cue, they almost immediately, it's almost always like fixed.
Yeah.
It just happens. But like my young men, I'll be like, maybe they're doing a deadlift and they have some like curve in the low back, and I'll be like, hey, like here's the cues. Let's try to eliminate that. And they're like, got it. And then they go and
put 20 more pounds on the bar,
and it's just bent back. And it's like, no, like here, let's do this. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, got it, coach. It's like that. Eventually we get there, right? Like, but it's me and them talking. Like, if that was just back and forth, like that would probably take 2 weeks of like videos of back and forth on every deadlift day. Like,
and I think that's
they'll probably be tired. And
it's probably the other piece of online coaching that I think is potentially a different way of solving the problem as well. As I like to think of like a constraints-based approach. So giving them lifts that will actually, by the virtue of what the lift or the movement is, will make them focus on certain things about the lift. Like if I know that they lose position off the floor, well then I might give you a 1 inch pause deadlift, where you have to pause for 2 seconds immediately off the floor. And it's remarkable, how quickly they won't put as heavier weights on because they can't, because you can't actually pause the movement, right? But then B, how that actually teaches them to feel what a good position feels like. And so I think when you're remote, you kind of find these ways of coaching that use, like I would always use lifts like that anyway, in terms of if I was trying to strengthen a weakness. But I think a constraints approach is extremely important with someone online, because you can give them a movement from something you've identified with a weakness in their technique, and the movement itself almost forces the correction, if that makes sense, right? Like you can't perform those movements with really shitty technique because it just won't work. So, or it might, but you're going to get punished set after set and soon realize, if I do it this way, it works better. And your body kind of figures it out. And that's where I think with technique online, there's the feedback videos to videos, but you can see what their main issues might be, and then actually say, right, here's some specific movements that I know help to address poor positioning off the floor in a deadlift. So I'm going to give you that. Here's something that'll help with, you collapsing in the bench. So I'm going to give you, something like whatever it might be in that movement to help you with that weakness. So I think there are ways as a coach to do the online thing better, when you apply some of those principles, because you're now not giving them feedback. But if the movement can give them that feedback, hey, that's probably a really good thing to do. But again, they do need an level of some basic understanding of the movement and experience, I think, for most people, whether powerlifters or weightlifters, before that should be the go-to. But again, if you're limited in your options, then you might have to take what you've got in terms of what's available online and figure it out that way.
Yeah, I think that constraint-based approach is a really smart thing, a really smart tool, in person or online.
Yeah.
Like it makes your life so much easier when it's like, hey, okay, well, I mean, I was a thrower, so like shot put and hammer and stuff, and like there was times where like my coach would just be like, hold on to this towel while you're throwing, and so like he'd hold the other end and I'd hold the towel, and it's like you literally can't do anything that you can't do the bad habit, because now you're physically pinned in, and then once you feel like what it's right to do it right the first time, then it's easier to reproduce after that, right? And having a lot of those tools in your bag as a coach, I think, is a huge boon for your athletes. Like, because if you're saying the same thing and you aren't seeing improvement, then you probably aren't going to see improvement.
Yeah, it's probably just they don't understand.
Yeah.
Because obviously they think they're doing it. They're like, because they even come up and they're like,
yeah, I did it.
It's like that, and it's like, dear God, no,
Did
no,
you see
it
how
was
sick that was.
It was not like that.
That's the other part, right? Is sometimes these weaknesses don't get fixed with a cue or a change in, like, telling them what to do. You actually need to go and be like, right, your upper back's actually just garbage. Like, we're going to do some rows, we're going to do some pull-ups, and you're going to get a stronger upper back. And then look, hey, 8 weeks later, it might look better, but let's build some strength in those weak areas first, and then see if it translates.
Definitely some kids, and it's always hard because we teach pretty large classes, right? It's me and another guy, so it's like 60 to, it's really been anywhere from 60 to about 100 kids in the weight room at once. So and then like one kid gets removed and they're in the back of the weight room, right? Like working one-on-one, trying to fit in. It's just like, you could just see, it's just like, it's like, dude, I promise, if you just put in a tiny bit of work here, you're going to be so much better than if I just let you come up here, you'll improve a little bit, but then you're always going to have bad form. You're just going to reinforce all these bad habits. Like, just put in the time. And some kids can and some kids can't, and that's on them. Like, so, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did an hour 30. I don't want to abuse your time too much. I mean, well, we've had you for
we
like
also
2
did
hours.
a 30. Yeah, we did a 30 pre-session.
I do need to get my squats in today, guys. Like, come on, man.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Gotta get busy.
What are you doing today?
All right.
What's your session?
This is always fun to talk about. I went to the doctor and got some blood work done, and they were like, all your organs are shutting down. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I got the blood work, and it's mostly just like my kidney numbers came back horrific.
Yeah.
But they've come back horrific every time I've had my blood work done my entire life. And a few years ago, I went in and did all the like ultrasound, urinalysis, like the whole 9 yards, right? I would go to the nephrologist, who's the kidney doctor. So keep in mind, I'm like $3,000 into this diagnostic process because the healthcare system in the U.S. is crap. And so I'm like $3,000 in this diagnostic process. The nephrologist comes in. He sees me sitting on the bench. He kind of looks at the paperwork for a second, then he looks at me, and then he looks at the paperwork for a second, and then he looks at me, and then he comes up and squeezes my leg, and he's like, "You're fine." And I was like, what do you mean I'm fine? And he's like, "You're just jacked. Like, nobody is like, we just don't get as many patients with as much muscle as you." And so
no one took that into account.
Yeah. They thought, like, I mean, at the time I was like 230 pounds and I had abs. And so, and I'm 6'2", so I was a pretty good sized guy. And
so he's
like,
paid $3,000 to get a compliment, man, about you're in shape.
Yeah. You're to get, professionally. I'm professionally jacked.
You can put that on your CV.
Yeah. And so anyway, I got a new doctor, and so now we're going through the whole thing. And he was like, can you just take it easy for a minute and not take any creatine, and we can get some new blood work? And so I've had like 10 days off, waiting to get new blood work to check and make sure that all my organs aren't failing. And so I kind of get to do whatever I want today. Like, I'm kind of starting over. I've had an unplanned extra deload, and so I either got to do. I really have been trying to get good at overhead press, so I'm either going to do upper body or I'm going to do squats. So we'll see. I get a Steelers choice today.
He also talks about everything for Kyle is auto regulation.
So I auto regulate everything, and I don't train on a weekly schedule. I train on 5-day rounds, and so when I've had a long break like this, I can just start wherever I want in the 5-day round, and then just start doing my 5 days.
That training load, man.
Yeah, it's just training load in disguise.
It's proof of like what we talk about, like what is going to work for you to keep you lifting for the longest. Like, I don't know that anybody should ever start training like Kyle trains.
Yeah, well,
you'd be confused. You'd probably be injured.
Strong as fuck, though.
Eventually.
Probably after you get up off the floor from being a crumpled mess. Yeah. From those 600-pound overhand deadlifts.
Yeah. I don't wonder if I can still do that now. I should try.
He's doing overhand deadlifts.
It's funny.
Do it again.
The funny part about that story that I left out is that for that entire time, I was trying to fix my grip. So like I was doing, farmer's walks and wrist rolls.
Not
like
looking
I was
at the
like,
obvious choice here of sleep.
Yeah. So really, all that happened is I had like the most. The most specific super compensation, that you're probably ever going to get. Like I just, I was doing too much for an extremely long period of time, and then finally got a break, and then it was stronger. So, but I haven't been doing any heavy holds or anything lately. Yeah,
neither have I.
Anyway, okay, so where can people find you? Where do they get your shows at?
Basically Instagram's the best place. So at HJP Method on Instagram. I'm sure you guys will add that to the show notes. That's the best place because that'll kind of link you out to any other websites and things. You can jump on whatever the link is in the bio, and it'll take you to podcasts and website and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, just find me on Instagram. That's where I tend to post things most regularly.
Yeah, sweet. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, guys.
Hang out for a second, though.